Today's Sci-Cafe is on sensors and sensing with an emphasis on the biological applications. If you think about it, sensors are all around us, and we'll learn much more about that when we hear about our speakers today. We have three speakers that are sort of taking very different approaches to the influence of sensors in the research that they consider. Our first speaker, farthest over to my left, is Professor Duarte, who works on sensing on marine animals. In the middle is Professor Khaled, who works on engineering those sensors so that it can work in different environmental settings. And finally, closest, Professor Sahika Inal, works on the interfaces so that the sensors that get designed by Khaled can be successful in the environments that we face in the actual applications in mammals, which includes humans. So we've asked each of them to give a little bit of introduction to the topics we're ready to discuss, and then we'll move forward from there. So we'll start on the far end with Carlos.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So I work on the ocean and marine ecosystems, and my interest is in understanding how marine animals use and perceive the ocean, and also sometimes I wish that I could see through their eyes and sense through their ears and their sensorial system so I could understand the ocean in the way they sense it. Because we go around in the ocean with a research vessel or a boat, and we take samples more or less randomly, but these animals have been using the oceans for millions of years, and they have evolved to use the ocean and understand the ocean in ways that we don't have a clue or understand. And for instance, for me to take a sample at 3,000 or 4,000 meters depth is a challenge and takes a long time. But sperm whales dive to those depths many times every day. And they are constantly using the environment and finding food and sensing clues that mean something to them that we just have no idea. So I thought that it would be nice to try to partner with marine animals to both have a better coverage of the ocean and also understand the ocean in the way they do, but we had no way of doing that. So recently in KAUST, there was a new initiative called the KAUST Sensor Initiative that brought together scientists of different interests with the common theme of developing better sensors to sense relevant properties in the environment. And then I was fortunate to team up with electrical engineers and all kinds of scientists within KAUST and also outside in KAUST. So this is a project that brings scientists from Australia, the US, MIT, and UCLA, and also Europe to work with us on this problem, and includes marine ecologists working with marine animals, people working with sensor development, also sensing well-being of marine animals, and also data scientists and people working with complex systems to then develop these new sensors to understand marine life. So the challenge was that whereas 40 years ago we were already tracking marine animals, then we were slowly accumulating data with very expensive and bulky devices, and we saw 10 years ago that there was the revolution of the smartphones, where now everybody's wearing things like this that have about 150 sensors loaded in one of these, and we sense positions, temperature, light, all kind of properties in our smartphones. So now we have massive amounts of data on how humans move, but the oceans were being left behind. So if we compare this to ocean sensors, we're still talking about that we put on animals. We were still placing very large backpacks or helmets that were about 2 kilograms in size and bulky, and actually interfere with the movement and the well-being of the animals to sense a few simple properties, whereas in our phones we have devices that weigh only 1 gram. So we wanted to bring this revolution of wearables and portable sensors that we have developed for humans to share them with marine animals, and then that was our challenge 2 years ago. So by now we have developed already about 17 different types of sensors to mount on different animals and sense different properties in the environment, and we have downscaled the size from over 1 kilogram to a gram or below. So this is one of the sensors we have developed. You are seeing the first marine wearable and actually seeing the first shark that was mounted with a marine wearable in a public aquarium in Valencia, and I'll pass it around. This is silicone based, it's printed in silicone, and it can measure temperature, salinity, and pressure, through which we know the depth at which the animal is. It can store data, it can process data, it's powered, and it can also communicate data through Bluetooth. So all of that in only about a gram. But we have not only downsized the systems, this is also stretchable and accommodates, conforms to the skin of the animal. So it's light and is friendly to the animal, and also the cost is also downscaled by a factor of 1,000-fold. So now we hope that we have these new friendly systems that we can mount in a number of animals. So in my back, you can see, behind my back, you can see a crab also with this sensor. And we have also produced tiny, tiny sensors that are milligrams in size that work with magnetic sensing, and we can even tag small things like shrimps and understand how they move in the environment. So that was my motivation to jump into this arena of sensing the environment, particularly with the ocean, and now we're seeing this come to reality and eventually partner with animals and see how they perceive the environment and also how they react to things like marine noise that we produce, and we can understand better how we interact with the animals in the sea.
Thank you. Just as a note, please don't open the case. This is a functioning sensor.
Yes.
And Carlos needs to take it on a research trip shortly.
Yes.
So.
And bring it back to me. The last one, please bring it back because I need it.
Khaled?
Okay. So my journey with sensors started about 20 years ago when I started my PhD. And I was lucky enough to work with a professor that told me, okay, go find me a nice application for electronics where my group was working on digital cameras. We were building the fastest digital cameras at that time, 20,000 frames per second. The cheapest, the smallest. But then he said, like, I don't like all of these, just go out and find something. And I'm like, I spent basically 9 months playing around at Stanford, trying to find something and couldn't. Until I met someone and he told me, I'm a surface chemist, and I work in the Genome Center, and they told me that electrical engineers build the smartest, the smallest, the cutest, the fastest devices, and these devices are cell phones and computers, and I like to use that technology into biology. And I said, to do what? I mean, I couldn't understand even what is he talking about. And he said, well, I don't know, but like, let's come and stay here. So I went to my advisor and I told him, and he said, fine, find yourself a desk in the medical school. And I spent 1 year in the medical school just talking to people, not doing anything, just being funded for free, just to find the cool application for that stuff. And at that time, the word was cool, fun, but it wasn't really something that people were really looking after. Fast forward, and then you can see right now that this is no longer something that people talk about like for chatting or for fun. There are actual facts, there are products that people use in their houses. All of us have people who are diabetic. And in the past, I mean, it was a big deal to figure out what is the glucose levels in your blood. And it's a very simple process right now. All you have to do is that you have one of those small devices like your cell phone, you prick your finger, you get a droplet, or just one drop of blood, and you can figure out the level of glucose in your blood, and you figure out, okay, do you need to adjust your dosage or you need to do something? So these type of devices that are becoming more and more common to use. Another type of device that's actually much more wider in its use is the pregnancy devices. These are devices you can find them in, I mean, I wouldn't say Tamimi, but there are supermarkets, you can find them in many places where you can actually have a device that can help you with an application. Now we are moving the lab from being in a hospital actually to your home. And this is a new breed of devices that are interesting for us as an engineers because it provides a new venue of challenges, new venue of applications that you never thought about and problems that we could think of. One of the things that you should start thinking about when you deal with these type of devices is packaging. How are you going to be packaging these devices? Traditionally, as electrical engineers, we build computers and we build cell phones. And these are very clear in their functionality, very clear in their form factor and their size. But now start talking about these type of emerging applications or emerging technologies, and then you start worrying about these are sensors that are going to be going under the water like the ones that Carlos is using. I mean, are we using the right materials? Or people who are doing implantable devices to measure some biomarkers in your blood. These devices has to be biocompatible. I don't want to be poisoning you if I implant them inside your body. So there are so many type of challenges, engineering challenges, that we never thought about, and we started to thinking about them. if you think about digital cameras, this is some sort of a sensor. It actually detects lights and converts the light into an image you store into your memory stick. And that device didn't exist 20 years ago. Now all of us have them in their cell phones, have them in toys, but these devices has to work here in Saudi Arabia, they have to work in Finland, they have to work in the jungle. So you have to start worrying about how can you make sure that, for example, to package them, how can you make sure that you work under different types of pressure environment, different types of temperature. All of these are questions that come to us, and we try to solve them and try to figure how to deal with these type of questions that come to, from the people who know about the application. So always start with an application that tells us, this is a problem we're trying to solve, this is a problem we're trying to deal with. How can you build me a nice device that can interact with it and can collect the information and present it in a format that people can make decisions based on it. In particular, if you start talking about biomedical sensors, people started dealing with a concept which is called point of care. And instead of actually having the device at the hospital, the device comes to your house. It has to be extremely simple. Some of the people using them, they might not know how to read or write. They might be old. They might be children. So you have to make the interface much, much simpler for them. It might be just colorful interface, red, green, yellow. These are the indicators that tells you there's something wrong, something bad. It has to be small in size. I cannot actually get a device that's the size of a refrigerator and tell you that's a sensor to use at home. So it has to be small in size. A big thing for us to work with sensors is battery. I mean, most of these sensors, you have seen the sensors that Carlos passed around. These are millimeters, they are 1 gram. And so some of the Sahika working on, she will pass them around, extremely small in size. But then you start looking into batteries, batteries are large. So the battery is becoming much, much bigger than the device itself. So how can we work on battery technology? And this is a nice research area that I invite you all to start working on. So there are many of these challenges. I'll leave Sahika now to talk about another type of challenge, which is once you have these devices and how to put them inside the body, how to connect them to the body, how they interact with the body. These are interesting problems that she can actually answer these questions.
Before we do this, I want to correct something. Khaled did not go to the medical center for a year and do nothing. I want all the students to hear that.
Yes, yes. I was talking to people all the time. I was talking, learning a lot.
He was doing a lot of research,
Yes.
and he actually brought up a topic which I'll ask all the speakers to comment on after I let everybody do their introduction. So, Sahika.
All right, well, that was a great introduction. Also, going from that way to this way, I feel very privileged to work in an environment full of great biologists and electrical engineers. Maybe I'm not sitting in the middle of them, but my research is somehow at the interface between these biologists and electrical engineers like Carlos and Khaled. So what I try to do is I try to understand how I can take a device, an electronic device, and this is generally a sensor because we want to understand our environment, we want to understand our body, which is why we are interested in recording signals deep inside of our body. I want to be able to take these devices and implement them in the best way as possible. So the field that I work in is called bioelectronics. As the name suggests, it tries to couple the worlds of biology and electronics to develop devices that can either detect disease or treat disease. And how can it do that? It can detect disease by using sensors. It can treat disease by making tiny devices that can either electrically stimulate, use stimulation as therapy, or deliver drugs. But as you can imagine, maybe I can give an example for these devices. This can be a device that can be mounted on the skin of a newborn, if you are interested in, of course, knowing that your baby is breathing properly, or this can be a pacemaker that can be implanted in the heart and regulates the heartbeat for people who have issues of heart rhythms. But as you can imagine, all these devices have a direct interface with the biological system. So before coming to KAUST, my only interest was with the human body. So I was just only thinking about how can interface the brain, the skin, the heart, the muscles to read signals. But now that I see marine biology and fish is something more interesting than what I thought before. You know, before I was just thinking about eating them, but now I think it's quite interesting to know more about the fish because it's a very interesting field to know. The same goes for plants. right? In the desert agriculture initiative, there are many people working with plants, and there's so many questions that they do not know about plants. What is the ion concentration inside the plant? What causes the plant to be more salt tolerant? To be able to answer all these questions, we need to be able to develop sensors that can actually go to that point in the plant, maybe deep inside, and able to measure certain salt concentrations with high sensitivity, as well as chronically for long durations of time. It's very easy to make a sensor that will be measuring something for 5 minutes, but ask me how hard it is to put a sensor at a squishy liquid environment like your blood or your saliva or inside of your body, and ask it to perform as good as it was doing in your lab. So, which is why I can maybe call myself in this audience, in front of this audience, a material scientist. But when I'm with biologists, I call myself electrical engineer. With electrical engineers, I'm the biologist because you're the interface. I try to engineer materials in a way that they can do great interfacing to the electronic devices so that they can be used very nicely at the interface with biological systems.
Thank you. We're about to move into the next phase, which is a group participation phase, where we'll be looking for questions from the audience and from our live feed to understand what you would like to hear about. So as we pass around some other sensors that were brought here for you to look at, I'm going to start with asking a few questions so people can start thinking about what they would like to know. And each of you in a different phrase, most directly with our last speaker in the name of her discipline, works in interfaces between different communities. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about your experiences and how you develop the vocabulary and the ability to work with people who come at problems from a very different perspective than you do. So we'll start again. Carlos?
Yeah, well, first of all, on the interface between electronics and marine animals, that's very challenging. So one problem is to develop the sensors. The other thing is to be able to attach it to the animals in friendly and safe ways. We're developing sensors that we have tested already in animals spreading from crabs, lobsters, turtles, different types of fish, sharks, and penguins, and then all possible marine animals. And every time we try to attach the sensor to an animal, then we face a different problem, whether the animal is friendly or otherwise. So, for instance, attaching sensors to a big white shark is quite a challenging task, but it can be done. But for instance, I just in February, in late January, we were in a workshop where we were testing our sensors across a broad range of animals. And then we wanted to attach that marine skin that is going around there, that we call it the marine skin, to a dolphin. And it was only then that I learned that the dolphins regenerate the skin every 3 hours. So if you attach something to the skin of the dolphin, it's going to fall off within 3 hours. And we wanted to be logging properties for several days. So how do we attach then the sensor to a dolphin? And what we've done is we have scanned in 3D the marine animals with a scanner, and we have perfect 3D models of every animal. So now we can 3D print attachment systems that are perfectly tuned and shaped to attach the sensor, for instance, to the fin of the dolphin. And in fact, in doing so, I thought, why don't we 3D print shoes for ourselves? We just need to scan our feet, and then we'll have the perfect shoes once in the lifetime. So these ideas actually require the participation of people with different backgrounds. So some of my colleagues working on sensor technology that are developing these sensors for marine animals, they don't even swim. So they haven't really thought through the challenges of attaching them to marine animals or the challenges of the marine environment, and I understand very little or nothing about electronics. So then how to bring this community together of people working on different fields and the data scientists. So one of the keys to these new sensors, to make them so small, is to optimize the power requirements. And you optimize the power requirements by actually optimizing the operations of the sensor, so it's software, and we have reduced the power requirements of the sensors by a factor of 20 from the first design to now, just by working on the software. So then we need software engineers that are thinking about how to optimize the lifespan of the sensors. We are working with people that are coming up. In fact, our colleagues, Jürgen Kossel and some others, are coming up with extremely bright ways of how to harvest energy from the environment, because we also want the sensors to be biodegradable and friendly to the marine environment. And right now we can do that because that you're passing around is silicon-based, so we can produce sensors that can biodegrade in the environment without any harm to marine life, but the batteries is the problem. But we can probably get rid of batteries by using systems that are actually harvesting energy from the environment as the animals move. So it's just the movement of the animal itself can generate the power to be able to fuel the sensor, and then we do away with the battery that also was indicated to be one of the challenge elements to be able to downscale. So there is a lot of brainstorming in the work we do, and a lot of interesting dialogues with people from multiple backgrounds. But I believe that everybody that is working around in the project is actually quite excited of what we learn from each other, and finding this extremely challenging project with a lot of new prospects that we haven't thought before, but also self-enriching in terms of our experiences. So some electrical engineers were playing with belugas 2 months ago. So how many electrical engineers working in sensor development in the labs, they thought that they were going to be interacting and playing with belugas in an Arctic aquarium. Yes.
Yeah. So my experience is actually interesting about this concept of talking to someone from a different field. So when we started our projects way in the days, I mean, when we were talking to them, how much are the signals you are expecting to have so that we can actually design our circuitry, our electronics to be able to read them and convey them? And the answer was, we get enough signal. And my answer is, okay, is it millivolts, microvolts, volts? And that's, yeah, we get enough. I was like, enough doesn't work for me. I need some numbers. And this was the first time I understood that when you start talking as an engineer to someone who's a scientist who's trying to solve a big science question, these are completely different fields. The language is different. And we thought that we understood each other, while in reality, we really weren't communicating well. And the answer was, you cannot just expect to work on these type of projects by sitting in your lab, waiting for the one with the application or the problem to come and give you a list. I want this, do it for me. And then you go and do it in your lab, and then you give, and once you are done, you give it to him and he works with it. It's not gonna work at all. You have to physically go sit with him in his environment and understand the problem and play around with his problem so that you could actually figure out what's going on. And at the same time, while doing so, he will understand what are the parameters you worry about, what are the questions that are very complicated for you, and what is easy for you to do and what's hard for you to do. Because sometimes there are misconceptions about what's easy and what's hard. And this led us at KAUST, when we developed the sensor initiative, and I invite you all to attend the meeting that's going to happen on May 8th for the sensors initiative, where we're going to showcase a demo of all the projects that under the initiative. One of the big projects and the fanciest projects, of course, is the marine life. Everyone likes to work with fish, and there will be like some aquariums with fish, with all sorts of sensors, but we will have also sensors that are monitoring the vital signs, that they are monitoring biomarkers in your sweat and in your tears, and these are all going to be there demonstrated for you, and you can see that technology, how they are going to fit in our life. But to cut the story short, we insisted that each project under this initiative that I'm currently coordinating with 17 faculty on campus and 8 faculty outside, is how to make sure that each team has all expertise. There are people from chemistry or biology, people who are electrical engineering, people from material science, people from computer science, people from math. Each team has all this expertise, because when you're dealing with sensors, there are people who are going to build the sensors, people who are going to actually tell you where to put the sensors, what is the best place to put the sensors, how many sensors you need to put. Do you want to put 1, you want to put 2, you want to put 4 or 5 different types of sensors? Then you are collecting all this information, and you have to do something with the information. One of the biggest problems that we are facing right now, there are so many sensors that are extremely inexpensive all around us, collecting information, and no one is doing anything with this information because it's overwhelming. So you have to figure out some statistics, some information. What is the good information that you want to collect and remove, and don't collect the useless information, and at the same time, how to process this information. Many times this information is noisy. There are lots of signal processing algorithms and software algorithms you need to develop in order to actually clean the data. And then how to communicate the data. Are you going to send it wirelessly, or are you going to be having wires connected to your animals or your body to give the information to a computer? So these are all questions that you have to deal with, and you cannot deal with it as a single person with certain expertise. The team has to have expertise from all these fields working and talking together so that you can solve the problem. We are not interested in developing the best pressure sensor or the best temperature sensor, we are developing a complete integrated system from A to Z that solve the application that we are intended to. I'll leave it to Sahika.
Wow. Okay. Well, it would be hard to add anything to that, but I can give you an example of my own experience. So I was privileged enough to work in a lab full of neuroscientists so that I could actually make devices and then afterwards test them. And the way of how these people are communicating and their language, even, I don't know, the currency of biology and electronics is very different. They talk about ions, we talk about electrons, but in the middle there's someone and some consortium that has to come together and bring all that knowledge. So this semester I'm giving a course on biomedical devices, and I see that there are some students in the audience who are taking that. We have a project where there are groups of 3 students who are taking one paper in the field of biomedical engineering. Let it be a sensor, a very good paper in a highly cited journal. And these 3 people who are going to analyze this paper, like, is the sensor good? Is it applicable? What are the limitations and where the technology is going? And I preferably really select people in these 3 people groups, 1 biologist, 1 material scientist, and 1 electrical engineer. You cannot imagine how different their ideas are on this particular paper, because the biologist is seeing it in her own perspective and actually thinking about if that device is going to work or not. He doesn't care if it is flexible or 30 electrodes or 100. He just cares about if it is integratable with biology or not. So I completely agree. One of the biggest challenges, but also the great thing about this field, is we have to work together and rely on our own strengths.
Thank you. So we're getting to the phase where I hope people have been thinking about the questions that they would like to ask. So let me at this stage ask if there are questions from the audience that you would like to have answered. Come on. Okay. Martin?
Microphone.
It's
hello,
on.
Hello. Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's been very impressive and enlightening. I have a question sort of to Carlos and Khaled. So when you put sensors on fish, you measure the parameters of the environment, pressure, temperature, salinity, and these things. Can you also measure, let's say, the vital signs of the fish? So can you correlate, what happens in the fish to what happens outside?
Yeah, so that's part of the project development too, of the sensor development in the project. So we sense properties of the environment, we sense the movement of the animal, and we also sense some key parameters that indicate internal condition. So in fact, that is the contribution of the team at MIT that is working in the project, led by Michael Strano. And in fact, the MIT had to open a new fish program because they had never worked with fish before. So they opened a new fish program and had to do the whole process to have aquaria and live fish. So what we've developed in the project is a new generation of sensors that are based on nano-encapsulated artificial antibodies that are able to recognize individual metabolites of interest, react to them, and then emit a fluorescent signal that can be read by an optical device. So basically, we are focusing on 4 chemicals of interest, ascorbic acid, we are measuring estradiol, cortisol, and esterol. So what we can assess with that is first the condition of the animal, we can monitor the level of stress, and we can also monitor the reproductive stage of the animal. So those are 3 very synthetic, robust properties that are integrating with the sensing of the environment. Up to recently, that's maybe like December, these sensors had to be implanted surgically on the fish. Now they can be wear, they can be attached, and they are actually reading the signal externally from the fish, which is challenging because the optics of fish scales and so on, how to be able to read optical signals inside the fish across the scale wasn't really trivial, but that is already sorted out. So now we have moved from implantable to wearable sensors of condition. But whereas you would think that if you had to choose one property, you would maybe choose glucose or something if you're diabetic, then the question of how to integrate signals is where it becomes important. So we're also working on the concept of meta-sensors, which is not the signal that comes from one sensor, but it's an integrated signal that has the most robust element of condition. And you would be interested, maybe surprised to hear, that probably up to now the trait that we believe is most important on condition is actually movement, but high frequency movement. So the best signal that we get on the condition of an animal, and that applies to humans also, is the accelerometer data that tells how we are moving at a very fast rate. So 100 measurements per second. And every one of us has a fingerprint of how we move, the gait. So the gait, the way we move is an individual fingerprint that is more reliable and harder to fake than the fingerprint or the iris of our eyes. So we can actually be fingerprint by just how we move, but we can also diagnose if we are experiencing some trouble, some pain, some disease, just by anomalies in the way we move, and even what our mood is. We can even get mood, not only for humans, but also for marine animals, from the way they move. So you would think that you would like to analyze blood and tissues and so on, but in fact, probably movement is the most powerful trait to assess condition.
And I would add the easiest as well. So, I mean,
Yeah,
movement
that's
is
exactly,
nice,
yeah.
I mean, it's easy. And all of us carry cell phones that has accelerometers in them. So,
So this guy is telling me if I'm happy or not.
It
Is that
does.
what you said?
It does, yeah. It tells you if you go upstairs or if you have parked your car, or it tells you a lot of things, but it can, if analyzed properly at a high frequency, it can tell you if you passed your exam, if your paper was accepted or not.
at the same time, it could tell your wife where you are, it tell your kids where your kids are. So it's actually a very nice monitoring device. So here comes a question of privacy and security. I mean, once you start working with all these electronics are good because they are cheap, they can be integrated, but they can be hacked as well. One of the biggest problems that happened a couple of years ago is that some people managed to hack into a pacemaker. And this is a big deal. They use this as a challenge. So they weren't doing something harmful, but the problem here right now is that if you can hack into a pacemaker, you can make it stop. And that's a big deal.
I thought that was just a movie.
No, it's real.
Okay. You have something you want to add?
Just wanted that, you didn't ask me, but it's okay. Measuring metabolite signals or like biomarkers from the skin or for implantable devices is a very, very big challenge in the field of sensors, because in contrast to motion sensors, you need to be able to functionalize the material that senses those things with certain biological systems, right? You need to be able to use biology to be able to measure biological signals. And they are not stable in high salinity environments at high temperature, high pressure, or low temperature, and which is why it becomes very challenging to be able to measure biomarkers at different environments.
So I had one question that, for you talked about, all of you in some sense talk a little bit about more invasive sensors, whether it's in the bloodstream or something for a heart monitoring. When I think about invasive devices, I wonder whether there's a communication challenge. There's clearly the battery challenge. There is the heat challenge and unintended insults from the materials that are being used, or the rigidity impacting functions of whatever it is that are being monitored. And I'm certain that from device to device, these things are considered different in their impact. But if you were to characterize from the research that you're working in, where are the big challenges for you when you deal with, say, invasive devices?
Maybe I started answering already that question. So the biggest issue is that biology and electronics, they are so far apart, and they are mismatches at a variety of scales. For instance, mechanical mismatches is our biggest problem. Biology, the tissue, wherever you want to interface, is soft. It is, it's quite squishy. It's what we call, the chemists will know, as like a hydrogel. On the other hand, the conventional electronics are quite rigid systems. No matter how you lower, like try to make elastic systems, they are still stiff to be implanted in the body. And as soon as you implant a sensor anywhere in our body, it's like a stick of wood getting into you. What happens? You just, in a couple of days, the body just rejects it. So the biggest problem is this inflammation of the foreign, the synthetic material that we prepare, we develop, and the response of the body to that. Therefore, we can only measure signals for a couple of days, but for doing chronic sensing becomes very challenging. Similarly for the skin, doesn't even have to be an implantable device. So softness, mechanical mismatch is an issue. The other issue is the communication. Again, in our body, the cells communicate with each other using ionic signals. So they have a different currency compared to conventional electronics, which uses these electrons to communicate with each other. And when you put the two things together, they do not understand each other. It's very hard to get those ionic signals and communicate with them. Maybe the third challenge, the mismatch, is in terms of the time scale. We are born as small, then we grow in size, we get sick, our metabolism changes, eventually we die, but the electronics, they just stay the same. They're static systems. So in our group, by using this, we are addressing these challenges by trying to make materials that can have both from these two roles, that are soft like biological tissue, but at the same time conducting as a normal metal is.
So do we have some additional questions? Yes, we've got one up front, and then we'll go to someone in the back.
Okay, so me first.
I guess the speaker's in the microphone's in the back, so we'll start there
Yeah.
first, if that's okay.
I have two questions. The first one is for Sahika, and it's a very stupid question. I saw one of the wearables that looks like a tattoo. If a person needs to use one, can they choose like the design of the wearable? And the other question that you were just mentioning about privacy, and it reminds me one of the Black Mirror chapters where they are using this sensor for the little girl, and they are knowing what's happening with that. How do you think, are we humans going to that stage? Do you think it is possible, and also with the ethical agreements on things to approve that? To have this kind of sensor to measure in everything in your body, and also just to have it as something commercial, like in the case of the episode in this Black Mirror series, the mother was knowing what was happening with her daughter, and she even knew when she was pregnant and all these kind of things. Do you think that can be possible?
I have already forgotten the first question, so I start from the second. Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. It is. It's quite strongly regulated which device is going to be commercialized or not. And there are very strong regulations on this, which is why I love Black Mirror as well. I can advertise it here. But I don't think this is, at least that's what I'm thinking. I'm quite optimistic about that. These won't be an issue eventually. So we need to keep our mind a little bit clear and be more open for sensors and devices that can be implanted for the sake of humanity, and to treat diseases, to detect, to prevent diseases especially. Because I do know that it's quite hard to commercialize a sensor. And the first question was?
Custom-made sizes, so like you customize the design for the sensor.
Yes, of course. So the field is at a stage right now that you can actually fabricate sensors on a variety of substrates, which is why all these devices that were going along with you, some of them were fabricated. These are all electrodes that can measure metabolites. And you saw some of them are on tattoo papers, some of them are on ladies' stockings, right? And some are just like tattoo papers even. Did I say that already? Yeah.
Okay, for me, I don't know how much these sensors are expensive, but
Could you hold the microphone closer?
Okay,
Thank you.
So, you don't want to put this sensor in one of the marine organisms and let it go to the ocean and then be eaten by a predator in the second day. So is there any way to protect these individuals from predators, maybe using vaccines to prevent any viral infections? And
So you worried about electronic bioaccumulation like you worry about
Yeah.
mercury bioaccumulation in the
Yes.
food chain.
yeah.
I thought you were worried about the price.
The, no, not
Yeah, so I mean, like for us, I mean, we don't care if actually someone, eats the fish and you lose this. It's actually good because we like disposable stuff. Electrical engineers like to build sensors that are disposable because if it's disposable, you have to buy a new one. So we keep buying, and that makes a good market for us, and we can make money. So that's the truth about disposables.
But
Yeah,
are you
actually-
concerned about the materials
Yeah,
that you're
that's- yeah.
using and accumulation in the food chain as a result of that?
Yeah, but you don't use any way to protect these individuals.
Yeah, well, the trend is towards, and that actually something that we have in mind in our projects, to move towards biodegradable and environmental friendly compound that are fabricated on devices, on materials that are not harmful to the animals or the environment. And in fact, at KAUST, Professor Muhammad Hussain has made big waves internationally with sensors developed on paper-based sensors that then eventually degrade and they won't harm the environment. On the ocean, we're also aiming towards having sensors that do not contain any materials or heavy metals that may be harmful. But so far, it seems doable, but the main challenge is the batteries. But the batteries, I think we can do away with eventually harvesting the power from the environment rather than have to have bulky batteries to power the devices. So it is not there yet, and most of the sensors will have some sort of metal that in levels that do not belong in the environment, and that might be even potentially harmful. But I think there's a good prospect that that barrier can disappear in a few years. So it's not an absolute limitation.
I have a question in the back.
Thank you, Professor. This is directed at Professor Sahika. Just regarding your answer to the questions previously, you were saying that there's not much commercial traction on sensors being sold, as far as I understood. But at the same time, wouldn't it be, one of your colleagues mentioned that the mobile phone, which is a ubiquitous device, completely sense-oriented, can tell partners where their spouses are and things like this, are worldwide and commercially present, not for the sensor, but for the data that it produces. So I guess my question is to all three of you in terms of where do you see the commercialization of the data being produced by the sensors? What are some things that excite you about that, and what are some things that worry you about that? Thank you.
So we'll start on this side.
All right, I start first. I didn't say that there's not much commercial interest. There's a lot of commercial interest, especially for sensors that can detect signals from the body, because our body is given to us once, and we need to take good care of it, which is why we need to listen to it. We need to be able to measure biomarkers that can be telling us of a certain disease. The biggest challenge and issue is, again, like related to the question of yours, is the biocompatibility of these devices. Like, how should they be regulated? Are they going to be toxic after a certain while? Like, disposable sensors is very easy to use because you just throw it away after you use all these, sensors that are printed on paper and so on. But devices, especially that will be in contact with skin or human body anywhere, they are highly regulated. They will be commercialized as well, but it's a longer path. I can also give you an example. One of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, GSK, and it's Google's parent company, Alphabet. In 2016, they took a bath, and then they not a bath, but a bet. They paid, I think, around 500 million pounds and started a company called Bioelectronic Medicine, where they envision bioelectronic devices, implantable devices that could treat diseases by using electrical signals. It's like peripheral nerve stimulation. So I think this shows how much there's of an interest, even from a company who earns money through drugs.
So that's the first half of his question. So it's clear sensors are important. But the second half is the sensors produce data. Data produces the need for analysis of data and protection and dealing with the privacy issues and what forth. And so it'd be nice if each of you sort of talk about the challenges. We may sort of laugh off the privacy rights of a fish, but still we do have an issue that these sensors are going to become ubiquitous and they can be used for unintended purposes. And how do we, are there design things that the two of you who are designing the devices can deal with, or other challenges from the biologist standpoint that sort of influence the lack of concern we should have about the amount of data that gets generated?
Yeah, so we published a paper in January last year called The Ecology of Human Mobility, because for 40 years we had a lot of data about, for instance, how birds moved, or whales moved, or dolphins or turtles, but it was wrong to implant a tracking device on humans for ethical reasons, right? So up to 10 years ago, there was zero data on how humans move, and the first paper published on this was, I think, 2007, using the register of the number of unique $1 bills in the US, that some nerds were registering this in a web page when they got one, so you could track the movement of these notes around the US, and that was the first paper ever on human movement, using a proxy, which is $1 bills that were moving around in the US. But now, I think that I bet that everybody here in the audience is tracked. So is anybody that doesn't have a mobile phone, a smartphone in the pocket? You can raise your hand, so 1, 2. But everybody that with a mobile phone is being tracked. And in fact, your phone company knows exactly where you are, what you do, at what speed do you travel in your car, where do you go, night, morning, everything, if you go climb a stair, everything, absolutely everything. So there's no privacy. So in this, we're asked to implant, to put one of our devices in an animal, we need a process of about 4 months of ethical clearance through committees that are well standard. You just buy off a smartphone of the phone company, and then you say, yes, of course, I accept the terms and conditions and so on. You're being tracked. You're being tracked, and nobody is really responsible for the ethics of that, because you do that on your own consent. And it's not only the data of where you are. Sometimes you can access the accelerometer, and there are, for instance, insurance companies that are making it a bonus on their premium if you use their app, and their app will prompt you to allow them to, the insurance company, to be able to share your position data. So if you share your position data, then you're telling your insurance company what do you do on the weekends, basically, how fast you travel in a car and everything. And so we're giving up all of our private lives through these tracking devices without being fully aware of what we're doing. So I will suggest that after this session, you go back and look at the settings of your mobile phones. Look at what settings you have allowed already that they can access your position data, and think about the consequences of that.
That sounds like a topic for a Sci-Cafe all on its own.
Yeah, that's true.
I might be pessimistic here, but there is no solution for this problem. I mean, these devices are solving lots of other problems, and people are making use of these devices, and they are improving the quality of our life. And in exchange, we are surrendering lots of information.
Yeah.
Are we comfortable with this? Depends. I mean, look at your grandfather and grandmother. I mean, my grandparents wouldn't use ever a credit card. The notion that you could actually have the information, money taken from your bank account with a credit card is foreign to them. They will never accept it. While for me, I mean, like credit cards, it's like nothing. I mean, like I give it to the waiter, I don't care even what happens to my credit card. And I put it online. So it's a generational change. It's a cultural problem that we're facing. And we need to be careful about, as Carlos said, read the fine print about what you are agreeing to and what you are not agreeing to. But even if you disable all the settings on your cell phone, by the mere fact that you're making a phone call, you're actually connecting to a tower that's close by. So I can know where you are approximately. It's not like gonna be exactly, but it's approximately. So it's a situation that we are dealing with, and hopefully the information or the problems that we are solving is actually going to outweigh the privacy issues that people are worried about and if you follow good regulations and ethical issues, maybe this could be mitigated, but it's not going to be resolved, in my opinion.
I don't have much to add, to be honest, but I try to be optimistic in terms of especially sensors that will be collecting information from our body in terms of these biomarkers like metabolite concentrations and so on. I think these will be all highly regulated, where this data is going to be used and where it's going to be stored.
I will add something before we close this topic, and it's about also Twitter. So now we were discussing about sensors that are like where we are and so on, but tweets, I tweet, and many of you probably tweet, the tweets are actually geolocated. So one of my team members in the sensors project that works on complex systems, he has a robot that is massively downloading tweets around. All of the tweets that are produced are being downloaded, and they are geolocated. And what they do with this data is that they look at opinion shifts and opinion diffusion of opinion and moods in communities. You can even predict the outcome of elections by following the tweets and how the tweets move, and you can tweak, for instance, political campaigns to one state or another, depending on how, because you know the opinions that are being shared. There's also tools for text mining, so you can infer mood, opinion, and so on for the tweets, and they are geolocated. And then we're using those massively. So
that is definitely a topic for another day. I think we have a person back here who's been very patient or maybe two people with questions.
Yeah.
Tad? Just talk and we'll hear.
No, it doesn't work.
Okay,
no, okay, sorry. So in the end, we want to be happy, right? The purpose of all the sensing of our environment is to make sure that we not only are happier, but that we are aware of the state of our happiness. And my question to all of you is this flood of data, which is actually endangering us psychologically and sometimes physically, doesn't make you happy? Is the fact that you have an iPhone makes you happier? Because proofs are to the contrary. Is the fact that you can use a credit card that your grandfather didn't use makes you more efficient, happier, and a better human being? What's the end purpose of all of this?
I need to ask, we've got another person, and we're running up against a time restraint, so you've each got 20 seconds to answer that question. Are you happier?
I'm happiest when I switch my phone off.
Khaled?
I mean, it depends. I mean, different situations require sensors, and I feel that if I'm sick and I'm a patient and I need an implantable sensor to monitor my glucose levels, it's a necessity. It's no longer a luxury. It's something that I have to have. It's not a question of happiness. It's a question of necessity for my well-being. So it depends on the sensors that you're using.
Yeah, I'm also happy when I know what's going on in my body. I want to be able to prevent disease. I do not want to become patient, but monitor what is going on in my body before I actually get sick.
So this must be a generational thing, because my answer is the same as Carlos's. So we got one more question here.
Thank you all for the great talk. I have a question about one of the samples, the tattoo one. Is it a kind of sensor?
It is a kind of sensor, yes.
Yeah, so what is sensing and what is it made of?
It is made of, I will not tell the name, exact name, we can send you a paper. It's made of a commercially available conducting polymer that is printable, and once you print it, that tattoo is able to measure your muscle movements, which is why it's also on the stocking. You can do the same sensor that can measure how good your muscle is moving around.
I think you have a follow-up, okay.
It is a kind of ink, isn't it?
It is an ink, yes.
An ink, so, okay.
So I've got one last question, and I want to thank everybody for attending. I think this has been tremendous, and the speakers have been spectacular. But you've also got 20 seconds each. What advice would you give to the students in the audience about what they should pay attention to as they choose how to proceed with their careers?
I would suggest that engage in interdisciplinary dialogues, so try to go outside your comfort zone and talk to colleagues, and KAUST is a perfect environment to do that. Go and talk to people that do completely different things to those that you're doing your work. Get interested into understanding what the drivers is, and also see how you can apply that knowledge and that motivation and questions to your own research.
Khaled?
I would advise you to be patient. I mean, like, nothing works from the first time, not the second time, not the 10th time. So in research, I mean, the harder the problem, the more satisfied you are going to be and the more fulfilled you'll be when you solve it. But it's not going to happen in the first trial or the second trial. It will take time, it will take hard work, and it will take perseverance.
Well, I can add to that. Be patient, but don't think that you have 5 years. In the end of the 5 years, you can make it. Think that like every day is a day where you can think about a sensor, you can develop a sensor and contribute. And exactly, KAUST is the best place to be to do interdisciplinary research because we are so close to each other and we can learn so much from each other. Don't be a fanatic of the field that you are in. Use your background for the good of different fields.
All right. I think if I could summarize my opinion of my own question, is that I've been involved in interdisciplinary research my entire career. I've worked a lot with geneticists and environmental science. None of the people who brought me into a problem brought me in because they thought they needed another biologist. They brought me in because they thought I could use the tools of my own discipline, statistics, to enhance the ability to tackle a problem that an individual discipline couldn't approach. So remember, what you are doing with interdisciplinary research is expanding the influence of your disciplinary knowledge and broadening the impact of the expertise that you've developed. So with that, I'd like you to thank all the speakers we've had today and thank you for your attendance.